It had started 3 nights ago, a quiet evening in town, the kind where nothing unusual ever happened. But that peace was shattered when Daniel Whitmore stormed into Harrison's diner, drunk and loud, accompanied by two of his equally intoxicated friends. Witnesses later described the scene as chaotic. Daniel had started by harassing a waitress, Emily Carter, a college student working the late shift. When she politely asked him to calm down, he knocked over a tray of drinks and began shouting. "I don't have to listen to you," he slurred. "Do you even know who I am?" The manager stepped in, a calm, middle-aged man named Tom Harrison. He tried to de-escalate the situation, but Daniel shoved him. That's when someone called the police. By the time officers arrived, Daniel was outside, yelling at anyone who dared look at him. When Officer Jake Reynolds approached, Daniel laughed in his face. "You really think you can arrest me?" he sneered. Reynolds didn't respond. He simply reached for his cuffs. That's when Daniel said it. The line that would echo through the courtroom days later. "My dad owns this town." Officer Reynolds didn't hesitate. "Turn around, sir." Daniel scoffed. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life. Turn around." But instead, Daniel shoved him. The moment his hand made contact, everything changed. Within seconds, Reynolds had him restrained. Daniel struggled, cursed, and threatened everyone within earshot. "You're done. Your career is over. I'll make one call and you'll be directing traffic in the middle of nowhere." The crowd outside the diner had grown. Phones were out. Videos were being recorded. And Daniel kept talking. "You don't understand. My father is Senator Whitmore. This whole town runs because of him." Reynolds said nothing. He just read Daniel his rights and placed him in the back of the patrol car. The charges came quickly. Public intoxication, disorderly conduct, assault on an officer, resisting arrest. Normally it would have been a straightforward case, but nothing about this was normal. Because within hours, calls were being made. From the senator's office, from lawyers, from people with influence. Some suggested the charges be reconsidered. Others implied consequences. But the case didn't disappear. It landed in the courtroom of Judge Margaret Lawson. And that's where everything changed. Not for money, not for power, and certainly not for politicians. She entered the courtroom with quiet authority, her presence instantly commanding silence. "Court is now in session." Everyone stood, even Daniel, though reluctantly. He rolled his eyes as he sat back down. His lawyer, a sharp-suited man named Victor Hale, leaned in. "Remember," Hale whispered, "let me do the talking." Daniel smirked. "This won't even matter." The prosecution laid out the case clearly. Witness after witness took the stand. Emily Carter spoke softly but firmly. "He was aggressive. I felt scared." Tom Harrison described the shove. "I was just trying to calm him down." Then came Officer Reynolds. He was calm, composed. "Did the defendant resist arrest?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes." "Did he make any statements?" Reynolds paused. Then he said it. "He repeatedly stated, 'My dad owns this town.'" A ripple moved through the courtroom. All eyes shifted to Daniel. He didn't look embarrassed. He looked amused. When it was time for the defense, Victor Hale stood. "My client is a young man who made a mistake," he began. "A lapse in judgment fueled by alcohol. He has no prior record and—" Daniel interrupted. "Why are we even doing this?" Hale froze. The courtroom went silent. Daniel stood up, shaking his head. "This is ridiculous," he said loudly. "You're all acting like this is some big deal." "Mr. Whitmore," Judge Lawson warned, "you will remain seated." But Daniel didn't listen. "No, seriously, do you people not understand?" he continued. "My dad literally runs this place." Gasps filled the room. Hale whispered urgently, "Sit down." But Daniel kept going. "This whole town exists because of him, and you're putting me on trial," he laughed. "My dad owns—" And then silence. Judge Lawson didn't speak immediately. She simply looked at him, really looked at him, not with anger, not with shock, but with something far more unsettling, disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper than any punishment. The courtroom held its breath. Daniel smirked, waiting, waiting for someone to back down, waiting for the moment everything would collapse in his favor, because that's how it always worked. When Judge Lawson finally spoke, her voice was calm, measured, and absolutely unshakable. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "this courtroom does not belong to your father." Daniel's smirk faltered, just slightly. "This courtroom," she continued, "belongs to the law." When Judge Lawson finally spoke, her voice was calm, measured, and absolutely unshakable. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "this courtroom does not belong to your father." Daniel's smirk faltered, just slightly. "This courtroom," she continued, "belongs to the law." No one moved. No one spoke. Even the reporters stopped writing. "You may believe your last name grants you power," she said, her gaze unwavering. "But in this room, it grants you nothing." Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out. "For the record," Judge Lawson added, "I have presided over cases involving individuals far more powerful than your father." A pause. "And every one of them learned the same lesson." She leaned forward slightly. "The law does not bow." Something shifted in the room. You could feel it. The weight of her words settled over everyone, especially Daniel. For the first time since this began, he looked uncertain. Hale placed a hand on his arm. "Sit down." This time, Daniel did. After closing arguments, the courtroom waited. Judge Lawson reviewed the case briefly. Then she spoke. "Mr. Whitmore, your actions on the night in question were not only reckless, but dangerous." Daniel stared straight ahead. "You endangered others. You assaulted an officer. And perhaps most concerning of all, you demonstrated a profound belief that you are above the law." A pause. "That belief is incorrect." She looked directly at him. "And today, you will learn that." The room was completely still. "I find you guilty on all counts." A collective intake of breath. Daniel's jaw tightened. His lawyer closed his eyes. Judge Lawson continued. "For public intoxication and disorderly conduct, fines and mandatory community service." Daniel barely reacted. But then, "For assault on an officer and resisting arrest, 30 days in county jail." The words hit like a hammer. Daniel's head snapped up. "What?" Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Hale stood quickly. "Your Honor." "Sit down, Mr. Hale." He sat, slowly. Daniel stared in disbelief. "You can't be serious." Judge Lawson didn't flinch. "I am entirely serious. My dad will not be serving this sentence for you." The room went dead silent. Judge Lawson leaned back slightly. "This court is not concerned with who your father is," she said. "It is concerned with who you are." Daniel said nothing. "You have an opportunity," she continued, "not just to serve your sentence, but to understand why it was given." A pause. "What you do with that opportunity will define you far more than your last name ever could." She picked up her gavel. "Court is adjourned." The sound echoed like thunder. As officers approached to escort Daniel out, the room slowly came back to life. Whispers, shock, a sense that something rare had just happened. Daniel didn't fight this time. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just walked. For the first time, without power, without protection, just another defendant. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered. Cameras flashed. Questions were shouted. But the story had already been written. Not in headlines, but in that moment of silence. When a young man realized that the world didn't belong to him, and never had.